Have you ever stopped to think about how many heroes pass by you every day, and you don't even notice? Sometimes they're right there, at the back of a room, in the corner of a hallway, with a worn-out cap covering their heads, holding a broom with hands marked by time and combat. But since no one sees them, no one respects them. And what happens when the invisible is precisely the one who saves everyone? At that American school, he was just the cleaning old man. A war veteran in social work, who no one wanted to listen to, no one cared to know. To the students, he was a laughingstock. For teachers, just part of the structure, like a fire extinguisher forgotten on the wall. But what no one knew is that he was the extinguisher himself, not of fire, but of tragedies. And when the time came, he acted with the coolness and courage of someone who has seen hell up close, and returned from there in silence. Every day, he walked the same hallways. The slow footsteps echoed between the walls as part of the routine. No child stopped to say, "Good morning." Some even pointed and laughed at the way he walked, at his faded clothes, at the old cap that he never took off his head. But he didn't react. He just watched, always attentive, always silent. As if he knew that, one day, he would need to do what no one at that school could ever do. An army veteran with years of combat in war zones, he was there under a civilian reintegration agreement. No high salary, no recognition, just a modest and solitary role, which he accepted with honor. But have you ever felt ignored, even though you have so much to offer? Have you carried a heavy past while the world treats you as if you were a burden? Over the course of weeks, he began to notice strange things. Backpacks too heavy for a typical day, whispers between teenagers, nervous glances exchanged in the hallways. He tried to alert management, but no one listened. Exaggerated concern, they said. After all, he was just the janitor. Just another retired veteran trying to fit into a life that no longer seemed made for him. But what no one expected was that everything would change in a matter of seconds. And that's precisely when this story starts to take a turn that will move you. Because when the real danger came through the front door, it wasn't the teachers, or the security guards, or the police who reacted first. It was him. That man that everyone ignored. He who walked silently, but now moved with the precision of someone who knows exactly how to protect a life. Can you imagine what happened in the next few minutes? What did this veteran do? How did he face an armed attack without raising his voice? And why, after that day, did no one ever look at him the same way? Stay with me, because what you're going to discover now could change the way you see the true heroes among us. He didn't hesitate. While screams echoed through the hallways, while children ran in panic, tripping over their own feet, while teachers tried to lock themselves inside their classrooms without knowing what to do, he walked, not afraid, but with that calm that only those who have survived war understand. His eyes, once tired, were now alert, sharp as in the days when he patrolled villages under threat in the desert. The difference is that, this time, the battlefield was a school, and those who needed to be saved had names, faces, and smiles that he saw every day, even if no one looked back at him. The sound of guns being cocked from across the hall was like a familiar crack. It didn't paralyze him. It reminded him of the friends who stayed behind, of promises that were never fulfilled, of the children that some colleagues have never met. And it was for them, for everything it meant to protect, that he took a stand. He knew what he was about to do. And even so, he took a deep breath. He clenched his fists, and it was. Nobody saw how it happened. But everyone remembers what came after. One of the weapons on the floor, a boy immobilized. Another, in shock, dropped his backpack and cried. And he, at the center of it all, still silent, with the same worn-out cap, with the same serene expression. He didn't scream. He didn't get excited. He just did what he knew how to do. Protect. Maybe you're watching this right now and feeling a lump in your throat. And if you are, you're not alone. Many people have gone through moments when they were ignored, underestimated, treated as if they didn't matter, even though they carried an entire history of sacrifices within them. Maybe you know someone like that. Maybe it's someone like that. If this subject moves you, if any part of this story touched you, leave it here in the comments. Talk to me. Talk to those who will also read and recognize themselves. These spaces are more than just videos. These are encounters between untold stories, silent pains, and forces that the world forgot to see. And when you comment, like, subscribe, it's not just the channel that grows. It is this message that goes further. It's respect that spreads. It is the legacy of these veterans that lives on. So, if you believe that stories like this deserve to be heard, help spread the word. Click like, subscribe, and share with those who need to remember that there are still heroes, even if they go unnoticed. Because what comes next will show you that the biggest battlefield isn't out there. It's here, inside us. His eyes saw everything, not out of distrust, but out of instinct. Those who survived war learned to read the environment like someone reading an open book. He noticed when something was out of place. The way two boys always arrived earlier than everyone else, with full backpacks and quick steps. The constant whispering between the corridors, always stopping when someone approached. Nervousness disguised with forced laughter. Small signs. Details that anyone else would ignore, but not him. He tried to speak, first with the 9th grade class teacher. She smiled, thanked him for his concern, and said it was all in his head. Then with the coordinator, who listened, shook his head and replied, "Let's keep an eye out." But nothing was done. No backpacks were searched. No preventive action was taken. It was as if the signs he saw weren't real. As if time and age had taken away his right to be taken seriously. And that hurt. It hurt more than any war wound, because he knew something bad was about to happen. It was a feeling that came from deep in the chest, one that only those who have seen death up close can recognize. A silent, daily, suffocating anguish. He came home every night with his chest tight, unable to sleep properly. He mentally replayed the same corridors, the same emergency doors that he knew like no one else. I thought about escape routes, blind spots, response time. And I prayed, yes, I prayed that I was wrong. But deep down, he knew he wasn't. Over the next few days, the smiles diminished. Some students' tone of voice became drier. Even the light in their eyes seemed different. It was as if they were hiding a serious decision behind still childish faces. And it broke his heart, because he knew what was coming next. And he felt completely powerless. He spent years in combat. He carried the wounded on his back. He watched soldiers cry for their mother before taking his last breath. He saw boys, not unlike those students, driven by wrong choices, hatred, despair. And now, on American soil, in a quiet public school, he felt the same darkness returning. But no one believed him. Nobody. The routine continued. Every day, he met the same restless eyes in the cafeteria. He heard muffled laughter coming from inside the men's bathroom, followed by complete silence as he approached. I would find strange drawings scribbled in forgotten notebooks. And when I talked about it, I got looks that said more than words. "You're getting old, that's all." And he started to believe it. Maybe he was exaggerating. Maybe he really had become paranoid. Maybe he was seeing ghosts where there were only confused teenagers. But a part of him, the part that had never turned off since his days in combat, wouldn't allow him to ignore it. That wasn't just an impression. It was a dirty, sticky certainty, stuck in the soul. Then he began to observe even more, anticipating each movement, memorizing behavior patterns, timing the time between intervals, discreetly testing doors. And every day that passed without a tragedy was a relief mixed with guilt, because he knew it wouldn't last. The school continued to treat him as invisible, but inside, he was a tension bomb waiting to explode. And when the explosion didn't come from inside him, but from outside, everything he had predicted, sentenced and warned about, fell on everyone's shoulders. Too late for those who ignored the signs, but not for him. Now that it had all started, There was no turning back. Comment here, honestly. I felt this weight. Nobody was prepared. Not the security guards, not the teachers, not the students themselves. The morning had started like any other. Noise in the hallways, voices crossing paths, backpacks dropped in a hurry, announcements on the loudspeaker that no one heard. The coffee in the canteen gave off its usual smell, drowned out by the hurried coming and going of students. But that day carried something different in the air. An invisible weight. A silence disguised behind the common sound of routine. And then the noise came. It wasn't a scream. It was a dry, hard sound that went through the walls as if time itself had stopped. One of the metal cabinets was hit first. The bullet ricocheted and stopped somewhere on the ceiling. In seconds, everything turned into hell. Screams. Crying. Rush. Children tripping over each other, pushing through doors, trying to hide under tables. Some, petrified, froze in place. Others cried loudly, calling for their parents. Teachers shouted disjointed words, not knowing what to do. In the midst of this chaos, he walked. The veteran. The same thing that a few days before they had called useless, exaggerated, crazy. The man they had tried to silence now walked down the main hallway, as if he were crossing a minefield, with the same coolness that only experience can give. He didn't run. He didn't shake. He just walked. I watched, calculated. I felt every step. On the left, a girl hiding behind the water fountain, covering her ears, her eyes closed tightly. On the right, 2 boys kneel on the floor, trying to crawl to the library. Further ahead, the shadow of the 2 shooters projected against the sunlit wall. And he was there, in the middle of everything, with his eyes fixed. There was no fear. There was a mission. Perhaps what was most impressive at that moment was the absence of hesitation. It was as if time had come back to him. As if, for a moment, I was back in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in any of the missions where life and death were separated by millimeters. His body reacted on its own, with the precision of someone who had trained this for years. There were no screams inside him. There was muscle memory. There was a kind of courage that is not born in speech. It is born in pain. And it was there, amidst the smoke of a gunshot and the crying of a child, that he decided to act. He passed through the first emergency door and locked it from the inside with an improvised metal rod. I knew the kids didn't know that exit. Then, he sneaked through the side rooms, crossing into an empty room. When he returned to the hallway, he was closer to them. One of them, the smallest, seemed more insecure. The hands were shaking. It was clear he didn't want to be there. But the other looked around angrily. A blind, dirty rage, fueled by who knows how many rejections, by how many traumas. He knew that one wrong step there would cost lives. He made the movement with a coolness that only those who have seen the worst can do. He dropped a metal trash can on the floor to create a distraction. One of the boys instinctively turned his face away, and it was in that millisecond that he launched himself. A quick, precise, silent jump. His hand grabbed the boy's wrist with enough force to make him drop the gun, and before the second reacted, he was already standing, between the two. The steady look, the straight posture, the whole body saying, "It's over." The second boy hesitated. He pointed, but he didn't shoot. He lowered the gun. I cried. It was just a boy, lost inside a nightmare that he himself helped create. The veteran didn't say a word. He just reached out his hand and calmly took the gun. He placed it on the floor, slowly turned around, and stayed there. Back to both of them, facing the entire school, and standing. The police arrived minutes later, but when they arrived, the tragedy had already been avoided. No lives lost, no serious injuries, just the trauma spread across hallways that would never be the same. And at the center of it all, him. Stopped, silent, with his hands stained with paint from an old blackboard and his face sweaty but calm. His eyes, always downcast, now faced the crowd in a different way. like someone who had just completed a mission, as someone who knew that, even though no one believed, he did what needed to be done. Write it in the comments. I would have done the same. What happened there was not an act of impulse. It wasn't sudden courage. It was technical, pure, cold, calculated. The essence of a soldier who learned to protect without relying on weapons. He did not react like a civilian, nor like a movie hero. He reacted like someone who spent half his life between trenches and impossible decisions, where 1 second defines who lives and who dies. And in that narrow corridor, time was also the enemy. After disarming the first boy with a dry, quick, almost imperceptible movement, he turned his body to protect the children who were closest. He used his own body as a shield, pushing one of the girls into an open room while keeping his eyes fixed on the second boy. There, the risk was still present, not on the boy's hands, but in his eyes. A lost look, sunk in anger and confusion. It was as if he was caught between what he planned to do and what was actually happening. And at that moment, any wrong word, any sudden gesture, could reignite chaos. The veteran said nothing. He just took a deep breath. Not fast, not slow. Just enough to keep your own heart rate under control. He made a gesture with his hand, a signal he learned from ancient training, used to calm panicked soldiers during ambushes. It wouldn't work with just anyone. But there, for some reason, it worked. The boy looked at the gun he was carrying, as if only then did he realize what he was holding. The arms began to shake. The weight of the metal seemed to have doubled. And he, in front of everyone, lowered his eyes, dropped the gun on the floor, and fell to his knees. It was a second of silence that seemed to last an eternity. A sweaty, heavy, almost unbearable silence. The few students who were still standing looked at the senior as if they only now understood who he was. He wasn't just the cleaning old man. He was someone who dominated his own body, his own mind. And at that moment, everyone's destiny. And there, surrounded by open backpacks, broken pencil cases, overturned chairs, and tears on the floor, he didn't celebrate. He didn't breathe a sigh of relief. He didn't even smile. He just crouched down next to the crying boy and put his hand on his shoulder. I didn't say, "It's okay," because I knew it wasn't. I didn't say, "It's over," because I knew that for that boy, it would still take years to end. He just stood there, gift, noiseless, because that was his language. Silence. Shortly after, the sounds of sirens began to grow louder outside. The police arrived, the paramedics invaded the building, the cameras started recording, the press crowded at the gates, but the center of it all was still him. The invisible man who, in just a few minutes, had done what none of the others could: contain a tragedy with his bare hands. And with a trained mind. Most there wouldn't understand what he did. Many would see it as a fluke. How lucky. But it wasn't. It was strategy. It was the result of a life of difficult decisions, because that's what military service teaches, acting when everyone else gets stuck, and do it not for glory, but for purpose. And that's exactly what almost no one sees. Behind the scenes of this type of action, there are years of accumulated pain, untold nightmares, losses that no one understands. The look on that veteran's face said it. There was something dark there, a weight that he carried with dignity, but that never stopped hurting for a second. Because it wasn't the first time he saved someone, and maybe that's why he didn't feel victorious, but just useful. As if finally, the pain I carried had been useful for something. While everyone screamed, he remained silent. While the journalists tried to extract words, he just nodded and turned his eyes to the children. I didn't want headlines. I didn't want applause. Because deep down, he knew that the next day, everything would be back to normal. People would forget. School would return to routine. And he would become invisible again. But in that moment, however brief it was, he had left a mark. Not on memorial plaques, but in the living memory of each child who saw that. He showed what it means to have dominion, what is truly serving, and how it is possible to transform a panic scenario into a chance for redemption. Write it in the comments. Silence is also strength. At that moment when the police took control of the situation and the school gates were surrounded by sirens and cameras, his name still meant nothing to most of the people there. For journalists, he was just the man who prevented a tragedy. For the school management, a disconcerting surprise. For children, an image that would be recorded forever. But still, for many, he was still just the caretaker. The old man with the broom. The man of counted words. It was only when one of the officers approached with a changed face, eyes wide, forehead furrowed, voice choked, that everything changed. He held in his hands a yellowed file, hastily retrieved by the veterans' database. And when he read the name out loud, something different settled in the room. William D. Ross, retired sergeant. Elite troops. Medal of Honor for Merit for bravery in combat in Kandahar. 2 decorations for saving injured colleagues under enemy fire. More than 30 years of active service. A CV that few survive to have. A name that, at that moment, broke the silence as if it were thunder. People's outlook has changed. Where before there was neglect, now there was amazement. And not that empty astonishment of passing curiosity, but the kind of shock that confronts consciousness. How did no one know? How come no one ever asked? How did that man spend so long being treated as nothing, when he had already been everything on so many battlefields? The teachers, who had barely greeted him before, stood still, motionless. One of them, who had told him not to disturb him during history class, now held his own folder against his chest, unable to face him. The director, who until then only saw him as part of the support team, cried silently, holding his badge with both hands, as if apologizing in thought. But he didn't show anything. He was sitting on a bench in the courtyard, with his arms on his knees, his face tilted forward, still sweating. Not from fear, but from memory. It was present, but at the same time, far away. And only those who carry the weight of war decisions understand that kind of look. A look that crosses time. This goes back to the past. That relives scenes that no one around can imagine. When the reporter approached with the microphone in hand, wanting the first interview, he just shook his head. He said he had nothing to say. When the police officer asked if he needed assistance, he replied that he was fine. But the truth is that inside he wasn't, because his pain wasn't physical. It was another, deeper, a pain that doesn't bleed, but that never heals. It was then that one of the children, still with her eyes red from crying, approached and held her hand. It was the same girl he had pushed into the room minutes before. She didn't say anything. He just laid his head on his shoulder and stayed there. And it was in that simple gesture that he finally closed his eyes for a second. Because at that moment, he understood. It wasn't about medals. It wasn't about recognition. It was about mission accomplished. The city began to discover who he really was in the following days. Reports appeared. Old photos were recovered. He, still young, in full uniform, on missions that looked like movies, but were real. The same posture. The same look. The same silent strength. And above all, the same sense of duty. One that doesn't need an audience. But what touched people most were not the deeds of war. It was the fact that, with all this behind him, he chose humility. It could have demanded status, respect, privileges, but he preferred to serve in silence, cleaning dirty hallways, picking up papers that others dropped, being kind to those who ignored him. And all this not out of weakness, but out of decision. A decision based on something the world has forgotten. Dignity. This is the hidden truth that few see. That behind every seemingly ordinary man, there may be an extraordinary story. An entire journey made of sacrifices. Behind the scenes full of pain that no one sees. Of losses that didn't make headlines. And scars that don't show. This revelation didn't just change the city's image of him. It changed the way many began to see others around them. Because it's not just about Sergeant Ross. It's about everyone who has been forgotten. About those who did the right thing when no one was looking. And about those who remain firm, even in silence. Right there. I respect those who walk in silence. The ceremony was simple, but solemn. The school playground was set up in a hurry. Chairs lined up, American flags stuck to the walls, as if suddenly everyone wanted to show a patriotism that they had forgotten at the bottom of the drawer. The director, visibly moved, climbed onto the small improvised stage to announce the name that now echoed throughout the city. Sergeant William D. Ross. The audience, made up of teachers, students, parents, and reporters, stood up. Applause filled the space, but he remained seated. He only stood up when a veteran police officer came up to him, looked him in the eyes, and, with a nod, invited him to receive the medal. He climbed slowly. His knees, battered by time and the endless marches of his years in combat, hurt more than he let on. The cap was still on his head. His shoes were still stained with the dust from the corridors. The face carried a mixture of discomfort and respect. There was no vanity in his steps. There was no pride. There was only awareness. The medal was presented by the city's mayor, a man who had never exchanged 2 words with Ross before the incident. He held the box with his hands shaking slightly and delivered a speech full of beautiful words: honor, bravery, civility, inspiration. But Ross, upon hearing all that, only thought about the times he crossed that same courtyard being ignored. The times he tried to alert his superiors and was discredited. The times he heard laughter behind his back. Because it's easy to applaud later. It's difficult to see beforehand. When he was offered the microphone, he hesitated. The whole city was waiting for a catchphrase, a statement, a war story. But he just said, "I didn't do anything that any veteran wouldn't do for this nation," and he returned the microphone. No pose, no rehearsal, no theater. The raw and firm honesty of someone who has lived long enough to know that too many words sometimes ruin what silence has built. The next day, the yard was covered in dry leaves. The wind was blowing strong, as if reminding the world that routine never waits. He arrived early, like always, dressed in the same simple outfit, the same cap, the same calloused hands. And he took the broom. But something was different. When he walked through the hall, no one turned their face. No one pretended he wasn't there. On the contrary, the students fell silent when they saw him. Some greeted him. Others lowered their heads in respect. A girl left a note on the water fountain in large, shaky letters. "Thank you for protecting me." A teacher brought him coffee, without saying anything, but with her eyes full of something you hadn't seen before. Recognition. These small gestures, so simple, were more valuable than any politician's speech. Because they weren't made for the cameras. They were true. They came from inside. And even then, he didn't change his routine. He swept the floor as calmly as ever. He collected trash the same way. He stopped to help a student who had dropped his books in the hallway. It was as if he was saying, with his actions, "This is also service to the nation." And it was. Because cleaning a floor where children learn is indeed a type of protection. A silent but essential care. A way of maintaining order in a world that insists on forgetting the basics. The cameras stopped appearing as the days went by. Press interest cooled, but the respect remained. And that was the real transformation. Because a medal shines for a moment, but character, that stands the test of time. And William knew it. He no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. His battle was not for the title, fame, or recognition. It was for something bigger. For the certainty that, even when the world turns its back, there are people who remain firm, and they do what needs to be done, not to be remembered, but so that others can live. It's funny how sometimes the most invisible person carries the most powerful lesson. And perhaps that was the great revelation of this whole story. That greatness is not measured by the volume of your voice, nor by the position you occupy, but for the integrity with which you remain standing, even when everything around you treats you as if you didn't exist. Write it in the comments. Honor is built in silence. School was never the same after that day. The corridors, previously filled with inattentive noise, began to carry another type of sound, more subtle, more respectful. There was now a certain care in his steps, a pause before each loud laugh, a silence that settled in when the veteran passed. But it was not the silence of indifference. It was reverence. It was the kind of respect that comes not from imposed authority, but from revealed truth. The children no longer saw him as the cleaning master. Now they saw a guardian. A man who, despite being ignored by everyone, remained attentive. Gift. True to its purpose. Some children began to discreetly follow him during the break, as if watching a giant. Others asked if they could help him with the broom, just to be close to him. And, every now and then, he would let me. Without saying much, he just shook his head with a half smile and continued his work. He wasn't the kind of man who talked about himself, but his story began to spill over into the details. One student said he heard him softly singing an old military song while collecting leaves in the courtyard. Another said that he saw a deep scar on his right arm, and that when asked about it, he only replied, "It was on a bridge, a long time ago." Most of the stories that were formed about him came from between the lines, loose fragments of a past that no one knew, but that now everyone wanted to understand. The memorial plaque was discreetly installed next to the school's main entrance, next to the metal gate he unlocked to evacuate students during the attack. A dark background, golden letters, and a simple phrase that said it all. In honor of those who protect, even when no one is looking. That phrase stuck in the kids' minds as a lesson more powerful than any class they had taken that semester. Because suddenly, the hero image took on a different face. It wasn't like the movies or the books. It was the man with the slow walk, with calloused hands, who swept the courtyard and spoke little. This created a real impact, changed mentalities. It generated small, silent transformations. Teachers, who previously passed by him as if he were a piece of furniture in the corner of the room, now greeted him every day. Some even asked for his opinion on safety, on how to deal with difficult students. It was as if, for the first time, they recognized someone there with accumulated wisdom, with a journey lived far beyond the school walls. And him? He did not seek this recognition. He continued his day exactly as before. I arrived early, before the sun. He drank his black coffee in silence, sitting on the same concrete bench, watching the first rays illuminate the school entrance. But there was something in his eyes now, something that resembled relief. A relief for someone who finally saw their life have a visible impact. From someone who knew, deep down, that they had made a difference. Not just on that day of the attack, but throughout its entire trajectory. This is the truth that few see. The true legacy is not made of trophies or speeches. It is woven into everyday life, in small gestures, in constant presence. And when you build with integrity, that legacy begins to resonate. In the looks, in attitudes, in the respectful silence of those who learn through observation. It's as if his every step now leaves an invisible trail that others follow without noticing. The boy who used to make fun of him was now collecting the trash in the hallway. The girl who never looked him in the eye started to wish him good morning with a sincere smile. The changes were not glaring. They were subtle but profound. Changes that show that, yes, the way we treat people can shape the way we grow. And sometimes the greatest lessons come from those who have almost never been heard. That's what makes this story so remarkable. It does not end on the day of the attack. It starts there. Because, by revealing the value of someone invisible, she revealed the hidden truth that many try to ignore. That greatness lives behind the scenes. And that, when courage manifests itself in silence, it transforms everything around it, even if no one is applauding. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched something inside. And look, that already says a lot about you. Stories like Sergeant Ross's aren't just about war or heroism. They're about humanity, about seeing value where the world often doesn't. And if this content made sense to you, leave it in the comments. I don't ignore those who make a difference. So I know you are with me until the end of this journey. Take the opportunity to leave your like. It helps this type of message reach more people who, sometimes, just need a story like this to rethink everything. And if this type of content is good for you, inspires you, teaches you, subscribe to the channel here. It will be good to have you around for the next stories to come. There's a video here that complements this topic very well. Click and stay with me there. We still have a lot to talk about.